I'm a part of Generation Z and I have a child. Let's talk about it. In this newest generation, Generation Z, which I guess technically isn't the newest, Generation Alpha is the youngest right now, with my baby being a part of that. But in this kind of new adult generation where they are technically adults, Generation Z, kind of like their millennial peers or people who are just above them, are choosing to be child free for various reasons. Now, will that stick? Will it not? I have an idea that once a lot of these Gen Zers reach about 30, 35, they're going to be like, okay, maybe I do want a child or two. But for right now, a lot of them are choosing to be child free. What do I think about this as a Gen Z person who does have a child? Well, for one, I would say I absolutely think that there are people who have very valid reasons for not wanting children. Like, for instance, if you're not married, you probably shouldn't be having a child if you can at all help it. That's probably not the top on your priority list right now, but if you are married or you plan to be married one day and you don't want children, what's your motivation for that? Now, a lot of Gen Zers give a lot of examples such as helping the climate, or they just want self-development and their careers and the money for themselves rather than towards a child, etc., etc. And those are the two primary reasons that I've seen. However, with those two reasons, I would contest that, honestly, the climate, I don't know that a ton of other, like, okay, for one generation to just stop having children to impact the climate, like, I don't necessarily know that that's an actual concern. It feels more like most people are saying, oh, the climate, because they don't want children out of another reason. And they're like, this sounds like an ethical way that I can say that I don't want children. Now, obviously, if you're someone and you decide not to have children, that's your decision to make. It's not anyone else's besides yours to make. But I would say a lot of people aren't wanting to put in the financial resources that are responsible for having a child, which, by the way, I would argue are much, much, much lower than our society makes them seem. People have children in Africa and they have much lower finances there. Now, one could argue that to have their child live a very fulfilling or extra life that you would need an exorbitant amount of money. I would argue that you can have a very fulfilling life even off of a very small income. And I have a lot of other videos that talk about living off one income and still living reasonably within your means and still having a fulfilling life. And I think that that's something that we definitely need to start prioritizing as a culture. But a lot of these Gen Zers are not seeing it. They want, probably my guess would be, they want a better childhood than something that they had for themselves. And so they don't want to do that to the next generation of children, which I think is a very valid concern. However, I would argue that if you are doing the research and the effort and the emotional growing yourself, you should be able to then develop an even better generation, and you can actually change the next generation for the better rather than continuing in the same mistakes that your parents did. Now, with that being said, I think a lot of people, we're in a culture right now that prioritizes self and that prioritizes looking, kind of playing the victim and looking at other people and seeing what they did wrong and how it traumatized you and how you can't move forward because of it. And I do think that that is an issue because guess what? Everyone makes mistakes. No parent is going to be perfect. No person is going to be perfect to you. Everyone is going to do you wrong at some point in your life. And that's what growth is about, and forgiveness and developing in those fruits of the spirit and in just character, I think, is learning how to let go of so many things and stop victimizing yourself. And I think that if a lot of people did that, they would feel a lot more confident in being able to move forward and have a child, because they're not sitting there constantly being like, oh my goodness, what if I do this wrong? What if I do that wrong? What if I blah, 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 and screw them up for life? And there are very real circumstances where this happens, but I think a lot of the people who feel like their parents wronged them, their parents probably didn't necessarily to a certain, their parents probably made some mistakes, sure, but probably didn't to the extent that they're claiming. They're just taking that, internalizing it, and moving forward in a way that's not helpful, and that continues to use it as an excuse not to move forward, not to be a better person, to try to have better children and move forward in that way. With that being said, I do think that there are very real concerns of not choosing to have a child, but are they in the majority? Should we see a large portion of the culture being like, I am this percentage, I am this person who cannot have a child and should not have a child? Probably if we see it as a more widespread thing, it's probably not the actual real reasons. Like if we're seeing something where it's like, okay, financially, I can't afford to have a child. If it's widespread and we're seeing a ton of people saying that, no, granted, is this economy the best economy that we've ever grown up in, that we've ever experienced? No, it's not. I am not saying that. But can you afford to have a child and still have a very reasonable life based off of that? Yes. Now, with that being said, can everyone afford to have a house? Can everyone afford to, have, the nicest apartment? Can everyone afford to live in the city? No. Like, you may not be able to afford the lifestyle that you would desire for that child, but you are able to still live a very fulfilling and very generally normal life. Like I said, you may not be able to buy a house. Now, I have some cousins who their family has never bought a house. They have always rented. And they still have a fantastic childhood memories in the places that they have lived. And they're not sitting there traumatized or feeling that their childhood was ruined because their parents could not afford to buy a house or didn't afford to prioritize their money towards buying a house. Okay, there may have been other things that happened that did have an impact on them, but that in and of itself, like the money in and of itself, wasn't what impacted them. And I would argue that for most children, the money is not what's going to make or break them. Maybe if you're extremely in poverty or extremely rich, there's going to be an impact that money is going to have. But most people are not in extreme poverty, especially here in the United States. We are of like the top 3% rich. Like if you live in the United States, you're the top 3% richest person in the world. So the rest, you don't see the rest of the world saying we're not having children because of financial reasons, and we're in kind of the top tier here. So I just don't see that as in most cases, as a very reasonable excuse. Now, you can absolutely say, this is not the life that I want to live. This money's not going to provide the life that I want for my children. And that's why I'm not having children. But I think you need to be honest with the fact that it's because of it's not the life that you want to live, rather than pretending that you can't do it, that I can't have children. Right now, my husband and I are living off of one income, and right now we only have one child, but in the future, we'll have more. But because we are prioritizing that, we are spending and prioritizing our money in a way that makes that happen, which means that there are other sacrifices that we make. We don't necessarily buy the all organic food. We don't necessarily buy, the fancy snacks. In fact, we don't really buy snacks. We make our own snacks if we make snacks. And sometimes we just don't have snacks in general. So we eat meals, and that's what we eat. My point being, there's a lot of sacrifices that you can make to help enhance and bring about your desired effect. And if you actually want it, you will take the steps necessary to attain that. I think in most people's case, they don't actually want the responsibility of having a child, because it is a huge responsibility. You have to wake up multiple times in the night to feed. You have to give of yourself in times when you don't necessarily want to. And I do think it is a huge responsibility to steward the next generation. Choosing to have a child, or even being able to make that choice, is a wonderful privilege and a blessing that comes with a lot of responsibility. And if you are someone who wants to have a child, but you feel like you can't because of finances or because of this pressure from society to chase other things, I would strongly encourage you to push aside those voices. You absolutely can find ways to financially make it work. And if that's something that you want in your future, I would encourage you, start saving, start prioritizing that financial choice now. Start making habits that are going to benefit that now, so that way in the future, when you are ready and when you are in a place where you can have children, you are able to confidently move forward in that decision without feeling financially burdened by that. You can watch some of my other videos after this that talk about living off of one income while having a child, and just how we do it in this economy. I also talk about Gen Z and children and kind of all of that, and then and daycare, and just a lot of these cultural topics regarding family that a lot of Gen Zs aren't having this perspective on. And so I definitely want to bring that to the table. And if that's something that interests you, go ahead and click that like button and go ahead and subscribe. Thank you very much.